Hey everyone, Cal Ewing here, and in today's video I want to talk a little bit more about being a Canadian and investing in US real estate, whether that's buying and selling houses, owning rentals, vacation properties, buying mortgage notes like I do, whatever type of real estate investment you're doing as a Canadian. One of the challenges you're going to need when you're getting going is a US bank account. And so I thought I'd shoot a video. I get this question asked fairly commonly from my fellow Canadians who are considering investing in the States. How do I go about setting up a US bank account? And in my experience, there's a couple things you need. It can be tricky setting it up from Canada. A lot of times it's the easiest to go down and find a bank where you can go into the office, because they're going to, some banks require you to actually be in person in a bank to show your ID and show if you have a company, a US company that you're setting up the bank account for or through, they need your corporate documents. So it might be worth it to take a trip down to the market that you're hoping to invest in, or at least setting up your entity, wherever that state and city is. It might be worth actually going down. The benefit of that is you can write off a trip. So if you want to set up a bank account, like my bank is with BMO Harris, which is a US association of Bank of Montreal. And they're based in Chicago. I've never ever been to their branch. But it doesn't really matter where you set up your account. So it might be worth taking a vacation, going down to Palm Springs or Florida or Arizona, Hawaii, wherever, and you can write off your trip, because if you set up your bank account, that's business, right? So the easiest way is to go into a branch, because then you can get everything needed. I would call ahead of time just to make sure you've got all the documents in order so that they can set up an account for you right away. However, some banks, if you do enough calling around, you might be able to set up a bank account remotely. Just you need to make some phone calls, and BMO Harris might be one to talk to. I would share my contact, but the guy's moved on since I set up my account, so I wouldn't even know who to contact. But at the time, a few years ago, BMO Harris allowed me to set up my account just through email and standard mail, and I was able to send in all my corporate documents and get everything done. Okay, so try that. And you could even try like TD, Scotiabank, and the RBC. They do have US banks, but what you want is a US account for your company. Whatever business entity you set up in the US, you want an account for that entity. So they may not be able to do that for you here in Canada unless it's in your personal name, or you're using a Canadian company, which I wouldn't advise. So if you're trying to set up a US bank account for your US company, I would talk to those banks here in Canada, and maybe they can connect you with their US version, because I know like RBC, I think they have branches in Georgia, I believe, or maybe it's TD. So you might want to start here in Canada and just ask around. But if you're able to travel going to the States, some of those big banks, they have a lot of great online features. Like I was banking with Wells Fargo for a while. I've banked with Chase for a while, but in both those cases, we actually had to go into the branch to set everything up. And at one point we ended to drive, my dad and I, who was my business partner for a while, we actually had to drive all the way down to Montana just to give them one document, because they would not do it through the mail. So it was a huge pain having to drive that many hours just to go into a branch to get things set up. But some of the things you need to make sure you have access to and look for are wires. You need to be able to send out wire transfers from here in Canada. So BMO Harris, they have a system where you call in and they have a code that you have to give them that allows you to initiate the wire, and then you provide all the document or all the information for your wire transfer, and then they call you back asking for a second code. So that's really handy, because I'm able to make multiple wires every single month from my home in Calgary using my US bank for my company, my US company. Okay. When I was working through Wells Fargo, I found out the hard way I couldn't send wires over the phone, and that was a huge problem. It almost wrecked a closing of a property I was purchasing many years back. So one question you always need to ask ahead of time is, can I send wires over the phone or over the computer without going into a branch? And that will be a big problem avoided for you, especially if you're going to be doing lots of multiple real estate transactions. Okay, so easy wire transfers through the phone or online. Photo deposit is another huge benefit. If you're going to be doing transactions like wholesaling and things like that, where you get checks sent to you routinely, it's a pain in the butt if you can't deposit your check without going into a branch if you're in Canada, unless you're traveling to the US often. So another thing that BMO Harris has is I can deposit checks using their app. And as long as it's a small check, I can easily just take the photo of the check, and then it'll deposit it right into my account. So that's another thing you need to think about, is how are you going to be able to do cash checks if someone sends you a check without having to travel. So I would sit down with a banker and make sure that you can do all of these things, check deposits, wire transfers, all of that easily online before committing to a bank, because otherwise it's going to be a pain in the butt unless you're traveling monthly at least. Okay, so those are my thoughts. You really want to think about convenience and online. I mean, most banks are pretty good these days online with the features that they have, but I would just double check to make sure that you're able to use their system from here in Canada. So to conclude, I guess I didn't give you an answer. I would check with BMO Harris. They're pretty good. And then, if you can go into the branches in the States to some of those major banks, the major banks are great because they have the best online platforms. But definitely make sure you're sitting and talking to a banker to make sure that you have access to deposits and wire transfers, and that you're not going to have any reason to go back into a branch to do any kind of transaction. Okay, so a couple things to watch out for. Also check in with the Canadian banks, the major banks that have US bank affiliates like BMO, like TD, I think Scotiabank, and I think RBC has a US bank as well. So probably start local and then branch out from there. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm Cal Ewing.